All right, here we are back in the scene we left off with when we were doing our materials. This is not the Eevee scene I covered. We didn't change much in that scene other than just showing some ways to do things in Eevee. But right now we are back in that materials scene. So that's where we're going to go ahead and start off with some of our animation. And for this animation, I am going to do this as a widescreen format, 1920 by 1080. So the first thing I'm going to do is switch my resolution back to 1920 by 1080. It was vertical before. And with that, it's going to make a little more sense to do my classic setup, which is going to be to have our rendered view down here. And then this is where I like to mess with materials up top. Probably not going to need to do too much there though, so I'm going to kind of hide that a little bit for now. Well, I guess we don't need to hide it too much. And then over here is going to be my typical 3D viewport. So I will turn my overlays back on over here, and then I'm going to move my screencast keys. I just realized it only hangs out in one window at a time over here. So here's the keys I'm pressing, but of course I'll try to add anything noteworthy in the actual video on top to be extra clear. So anyways, to get this first animation set up, we're actually going to be doing the last animation in that sequence. And I went ahead and spent some time, a couple days, figuring out what I wanted the final animation to be. I've been thinking about it, I swear, for months, but took some time and figured out what that animation should be. And then now what we're going to do is basically try to recreate those shots. So what was actually rendered there is not necessarily what we're going to do exactly, but we sure are going to try to get as close as possible, enough that you should definitely have all the tools you need to make that happen. So the first thing I am going to do, I think I've said that already, so we're probably on to the third or fourth thing, but I want to basically create several sequences, and those are going to be strung together to create our final animation. And my final animation is going to be it ended up being about 20 seconds, but rendered wise, there's only about 15 seconds of rendered content. So I'm going to render out 5-second sequences, and you can use whatever you like. 24 frames per second is not uncommon, but I typically like to change this up to 30 frames per second. It's just a little bit smoother and it looks nice. 60 frames per second, of course, would be very high quality, but many platforms don't even support that. And of course, it's double the frames to render, so something to consider there. So with this set up, my viewport how I like it, we've got that at 30 frames per second. This whole animation is going to be, like I said, I think about 5 seconds. I'm going to render out basically 3 5-second sequences, and then we'll kind of cut those together into the final clip. So 30 times 5, you can do the math right there in the thing, is 150. You can also do the math in your head if you're a math nerd. Just kidding. If you're able to use Blender as much as we've used it so far, you're probably a pretty smart person, so pat yourself on the back. I'm going to turn off my overlays here because this is now my camera view. So I want to do that last shot with the 3 bottles first because it's most similar to where we left off, and it's just kind of a pretty basic scene, honestly. So to do that, what I will do is, let's just pull this out a little bit. I basically want to what I like to do is, I like to get this to what I would have in the last frame, basically. So we're just going to kind of set up that last frame. And this is getting in the way a little bit in both the viewport and my actual render. So what I can do to hide that is go down here into the options for visibility. You can turn that off to show in viewports, but then we actually lose the reflection. So what I'm going to do is turn off the camera visibility, which will hide it in any rendered views. We're not actually looking through our camera here, but it is not seen, and it won't be, if it was in the way, it wouldn't be rendered. But we're still getting it in the reflection there. So you can see if we turned off glossy, for example, it'll go away. So we're just turning off the camera ray visibility. So we won't need to worry about the camera clipping. And then over here, I still want to know where that is. So I don't want to completely hide it. And the way I'll do that is in the viewport display, This is basically the maximum fidelity at which it would be displayed. So bounds is just going to create a box. That's a little bit confusing. So I'll leave it at wire so that we can at least see through it and see kind of where it is, but it's not going to be getting in our way quite as much. So with our one bottle there, let's just kind of get that framed how we like. Maybe we'll just kind of bump up the Z location, and you can move things however you want in Blender. You can press G and Z. You can click up here and drag, which is what I see myself doing a lot for some reason. Or of course, if you wanted to, you could turn on your gizmo, and I actually do use the gizmos quite a bit from time to time, but we'll just see how it plays out. I don't know what I'm gonna use the most now that I've got the gizmo there. I'm gonna be tempted to use that. So for the first shot, we've got 3 bottles. So right now we just have 1. We need to add 2 more, of course. So what I'm gonna do is go into my top view by pressing 7. And then just to make sure I have everything selected, I'm going to press Alt-Z to go into my X-ray mode. And then Alt-A is, by the way, what I'm doing to make sure everything is deselected. I'm going to press C to circle select, and then in the top view, just select everything there. And that actually did also get our plane, so I can shift and left click that to, that will now it's the active object still selected, but deselect it one more time, and we just have all our bottle objects there. Now what I'll do is press Alt and D, and that will create a linked duplicate. And what that means, and I'm holding Control here just to snap to some nice increments as I'm in the middle of that command. I'll just set that right there for now. So by pressing Alt D, that created a linked duplicate of everything. You can see this bottle now has its own name. It's bottle 002. This is bottle, and I think our wine took the bottle 001. So yeah, maybe we should go ahead and rename that wine. So we'll press Enter there, and that's F2, by the way, with an object selected to rename it. You can of course do it over here, I think, by double clicking as well. So let's name this wine, I guess 2, or we could just, you know what, if we did wine and just named it, it's gonna automatically. Oh, now it changed now into 001. I want the first one to be 1. Not that that matters at all. Okay, so now it's 001. You know, just kind of have that beautiful, disgusting 001 default naming convention. So that looks pretty fabulous. We've got 2 bottles there. So what I was trying to say is that, you know, with a linked duplicate, if we were to change the foil color, for example, to something atrocious, that's not so bad. Hey, it's a little bit holiday themed there. It would change it on both. So it's got the same materials. Even if we were to edit the geometry, for example, it's going to do it on both of them. And since I'm not going to be making any changes between the bottles, that's exactly what I want. So it will also automatically be all linked to this empty. So now I can just move this around with its own empty, which is bottle controller 001. So what I'll do, I kind of want to create the shot where when you zoom in, you're just looking at one bottle, but then they kind of flare out from each other. So maybe let's go ahead and kind of stack them up so they're beside each other. And while I've got this one over here, I'm going to go ahead and do one more time Alt-D and create our 3rd bottle there. So let's go ahead and move this bottle, just holding the empty there, to a position right behind, and then the 3rd one we will snap over to right around there. And our lighting scenario is totally the same. You know, you may want to change some things a little bit, but we'll see what we can do just with how we have it now. Now we can see, since we pulled out, this is coming into a frame a little bit, so I'm gonna just press SX and scale that out a little bit. And just to make sure we're super covered, I'm gonna maybe move this up a little bit. Typically I want the seamless backdrop, maybe we can actually move that down, that didn't need to be that high. I typically want the seamless backdrop to be just barely out of frame. If it's too large, you can get some unrealistic reflections, or you know maybe you had some world light kind of coming in from this backside. If this was too large, it could be blocking some of that. So I like it to be just as big as it needs to be. Give myself a little bit of coverage. You know, sometimes when you get into animating, you may accidentally reveal some of the world behind the seamless backdrop. So it's good to have a little bit of room to play with, but I like to keep it, something like that I think looks pretty good. So we've got our 3 bottles there, hiding in single file. They're writing single file to hide their numbers, and we want to animate them flying outwards. And the other thing while I'm looking at it, I did end up making this, I think, a little bit more of like a gray. And for the sake of mimicking the original video as much as possible, I'm going to do that. So just bumping that up to a gray. It looks very white, and that's a little bit of a product of all the lights we have in here. So, balance things out. The lighting is probably the most important, and then you can tweak, the lighting on the object being the most important, and then you can tweak the surrounding materials to kind of work with it. If this was super white, that's probably a little bit too much, but this dark gray ends up looking like a nice light gray when we have all our things in there. So that's a good final place for the camera, because that's about where we want that bottle. So let's go ahead, and that's the Y location we're going to be animating to go in and out. So let's insert a keyframe there. I also know I'm going to want to tilt downwards a little bit to be looking at the label when I'm all the way in. So that's going to be the X rotation. So let's go ahead and insert a keyframe there as well. And make sure you're inserting these keyframes on frame 150 at the end of the animation. If you happen to be over here and inserting keyframes, that's okay. It's easy to just click and then drag keyframes you can see down there at the bottom into the proper location. So that's good. And then we may also need a little bit of Z location, I think, to go. Well, we can wait on that. So let's just, you never want to add too many keyframes. Like I wouldn't want to just insert all the keyframes there, because then when I get into the graph editor and things like that, you're gonna have this Y channel and this Z channel, and if you're not messing with those, it's a good idea to just leave them empty. So for me, I know I want Y location, which is pulling backwards, and then I also want some X rotation, which is looking downwards and upwards. So that's a good place to finish things out. Now, where do I want to start? Well, for one, I know that those bottles are actually going to fly out. So let's go ahead and insert keyframes for the bottles. Those are going to start right there. And, they'll actually stay there a little bit when we pull out. So let's just maybe at around frame, what do we say? Maybe like, I'm not sure what I did in mine. We're not going to worry too much about copying it exactly. Because ideally you guys take these, guys and girls, take these skills and do your own thing with it anyways. So I just want to make sure we're covering all the basics. So the bottles are going to slide outwards, and it's gonna need to come up a little bit so that it's they align in a nice triangle formation. So that was the X location and the Y location. And of course we don't want those. Wait, do we want them on frame 80? Yeah, I guess maybe so that it's going to be in its single file place up until, we can change it later if we want. Let's leave it at 90. So then with my cursor down here kind of still on the 90, I'm going to insert the same keyframes for this object. Insert keyframe, and then we're actually going to do a little Z rotation too. So let's go ahead and we'll insert a keyframe there, and then we'll insert the keyframe down here as well. Now we may want these to be angled differently, but for right now we'll just leave that at 0. We can make some changes in the graph editor if we need to. So we've got those keyframes properly inserted, and then by the end of the animation, maybe there's 10 frames or 20 frames, maybe 30 frames. So I'm trying to decide. I don't want them to be still coming out into their formation just until the very end. I want them to have, a second where they're static. So, 1 second exactly would be 30 frames. So at frame 120, we can assume that they would be completely in the place we want them. So where do we want them? Let's go ahead and move them there. I'm just going to press Alt-Z for some reason so I can see the grid, which can't really see the grid because that big plane's in the way. That's fine. I'm still pressing Alt-Z because it makes me feel good. We're going to just move this into position. Now with the grid, I'm holding control because I want these to be even. So I know if I hold control, then I can get the other one in the same position. If you zoom out a little bit, you'll start to reach the different level of snap there, which is too much anyway. So let's just zoom in. Okay, so I want it to be out to, and again, you could do this like this way if you wanted to, but I'm going to just kind of eyeball it. Let's get this one into a good place. Now, this comes down to some composition thinking here, but I don't want like I don't want these lines to be, I don't want those to come, together like that. I want there to be a little bit more of an overlap so they kind of feel a little bit more nested, if you will. But I also want a little bit of light to be able to come through right here. So I need to move that back just a little bit. And maybe we can move it out a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe something right there. I think that looks pretty good. And now for reference, I can actually look and see that, okay, the corner of that box is touching the bottle. So let's go ahead and insert single keyframe, insert single keyframe. If you see that orange, that means the value has changed, but there is not a keyframe there. Basically means like if you move off this frame, it's going to snap back to where it's supposed to be. So let's show you that with this, for example. So let's move this into position. And then let's say you've got it lined up evenly. And great. Okay, so let's pause our rendered view and let's play our animation. Oh, it snaps right back. That one's working fine because it's got the keyframes, but this one doesn't. So let's go back to our frame. What was it? It was frame. Clicking on this one to see where that frame was, 120. So let's select this empty here, and then let's move that back into the place we want, which is right about there. And then let's go ahead and insert those keyframes, and I'm right-clicking and inserting the single keyframe. So now, if we, okay, so this is paused. Yeah, so typically when I'm playing animation, if I'm in Eevee, I'll let it go. But if I'm in Cycles Render, I like to let the animation paused, and then we can actually go into our camera view here to watch it. And boom, they slide out. Very nice looking. Very, very nice. So we do have a few more things to change here. And by the way, I mentioned it, I think, at some point earlier, maybe in the materials section, but I want to see the whole texture just for the heck of seeing it. I have got this gloss probably selected now, but in the shader editor, if you click on a different image, that should be the one that displays when you're in this texture view. And once again, you need to be in texture view if you want to see your textures in your viewport, in just a regular solid viewport. So that's good. Let's maybe do a little bit of animation with the camera now. And then the last thing we'll do is play with the curves a little bit just to kind of get it nice and smooth. So let's go ahead and maybe let's change this. We don't really need to see it rendered at the moment. So maybe this will just be our camera view where we can watch in real time. And then we'll make the changes over here. So let's say at the start of the animation, we've already got the Y location and the X rotation nailed down. So let's go to frame 1 and let's have this pulled in quite a bit, maybe something like that, and looking down. Yeah, I think I'm going to want a little bit of Z location too. So let's just let this snap back to where it was and go ahead and insert the Z location keyframe on 150. I'm going back to frame 150 because I know I already set the shot up there. So before I go change in the Z location, I want to go ahead and insert a keyframe. So let's go back to frame 1 now. And then I'm going to pull in, like I said, and then go down, maybe just a tad, and then also look down a little bit. And I'm just kind of getting that into a nice place where it's just sort of framed how I like it. And by the way, if you do want to see some composition guides, like the rule of thirds, for example, you can turn that on. It is not going to show that when you don't have your overlays on, so you need to turn those on. And look at that, nailed it right in those lines. Not that you need to do that exactly, but something to consider if you are interested in using some composition guides. But honestly, over time, I think you'll just get a feel for it, and you'll know what looks good. So I'm not going to lie, I do use those, but you don't have to. Just there if you want it. So once again, we have the orange keyframes here. That means we have changed the value, but it is not the keyframed value. So we need to right-click and insert keyframes right there. I'll cover it really quickly too. Insert keyframes is going to insert keyframes for all channels on that transform, and then insert single keyframe will insert it just on the one value. And then similarly, like down here, clear keyframes is going to get rid of all the keyframes for the entire set. You can see now that's not even orange. Clear single keyframes is going to clear all of them for one channel. and then delete keyframes is going to delete them for all channels on just that frame, and then delete single keyframe will delete it for that one channel on that one frame. So that's very confusing. It's just going to take some experience. That's all I can tell you. But that is what all those do. So we've got the frames there now. And this is where the amateurs would leave it off. No, I guess the amateurs left off at the still render section and did not want to carry on with the animation. But what we have now is a perfectly acceptable animation. We have the default Blender easing. Let's go ahead and start taking a look at that. I think I want to do some graph editoring. Maybe we'll do that up here. I'm going to drag a new window down, and let's change this to a graph editor. I guess, we don't really need the shader editor up. I guess we could do it up there. Nah, we'll just leave it up in case we need that for whatever the heck we need it for. So this is, and I'm going to press A to select everything, and then I think it's period on the keyboard, maybe period on your number pad will frame everything that's selected, but I actually have that bound to a button on my mouse, but I think it's period, like the decimal point all the way on the right side of your keyboard on the number pad. It's a command called frame selected, and I think you could actually, let's see if I get out of here and then search for frame selected, view frame selected. So yeah, mine is bound to a button on my mouse. Similar to the quick favorites, I do not, my mouse only has, besides left click, right click, and the middle mouse, it only has 2 buttons, and I literally only have one of them bound, and it's to this command, frame selected, because I use it so much. I use it everywhere. Probably should have mentioned it earlier, but I have it. It's separate commands too, by the way, for the viewport and for other things, but I use this frame selected so much, even on the texture. See, I have the bottle shader selected here, but I can't see where it is, so press the mouse button and it'll bring it into frame. That's something that speeds up my workflow a ton. Again, probably should have mentioned that earlier, but it works also in the graph editor. And by the way, if you do want to change hotkeys, I know we're moving kind of slow through this first animation, but I'm just covering a lot of basics here, and hopefully we don't have to go over those in the next set. But in your key map, you can find anything. For example, that frame selected, I just went in and changed them all to button for mouse. So it is actually, they're all there's separate keyframes for all depending on if you're in the shader editor and the graph editor, but I just changed them all so that my button for mouse works lovely. So once again, keyframes. Now this is a little bit hard to see even though we framed selected, but that's because, for example, our Z location is only going up. If we scrub through this animation, so it's at what, 21-ish centimeters there. Sorry, so it ends at 23 and it goes down to 13. So that's a change of an arbitrary number of 10. But the Y, for example, is at negative 42 centimeters and goes all the way up to negative 112 centimeters. So it's a much bigger change. So you can, maybe you can see that more in here. Anyways, the point I'm trying to get at is click this normalize button. Now we can see everything much better. So it's basically, instead of actually using the real numbers, it's going to, it's just going to normalize it all on values of -1 to 1 so that you can see all the keyframes. So now that we can see all the keyframes and we can see all the curves, we can see, oh gosh, Control Z, undo. I accidentally clicked and dragged. Don't want to do that. But we can see this easing happening now. If you ever used maybe an Adobe software, Easy Ease is kind of what that's called. But basically what it does is, if you're familiar with graph curves, and again, this is kind of a complicated thing that maybe I'll do a full tutorial on just curves sometime, but basically this is showing you your acceleration. So if something was flat, basically you've got time here, your frames, and then the value here. So over time, the steeper it is, the faster that value is changing basically. So it starts off slow, it will speed up a little bit, and then you'll see it kind of slows down a little bit towards the end. That's what that easing is, which is fine. And like I said, that's a perfectly fine animation if that's all you want to do. You don't want to mess with it too much. But, and actually I don't hate it for the zoom out, But one thing I do want is to look up and move up a little bit faster. So I'm going to hide this Y location because I don't mind it just default like that. But for the X location or X rotation and the Z location, and this is one thing that can be a little confusing when you use this normalize option, is that you might start to see things stacked if you have not messed with the frames too much. But right now we've got the E's, and the reason I'm noticing I want to change this is because it's taking too long to look up. So I want all the bottles to be in frame when they start to pull out from each other. And actually, you know what? I don't want these easing out like that. In this animation, that's happening just too fast. So watch, I'm going to select both these and then I can just drag. So that's happening. I want it to happen a little bit slower, maybe a little bit sooner. So I'm just going to click on that 90 and that should grab them for all the objects. Yes, you can see they're both moving. So that was on the 90. I'm going to pull it all the way back to the 70. Just give myself a little bit more, give those a little more time to settle into place. And so with those, I don't want the easing. So I was going to animate the camera, but I'm going to animate this first because the camera is going to be based on the framing of these objects. So I should do that first, if that makes sense. So those have that same easing there. But I want them to kind of pop out. And many of you watching this may have watched my cell phone tutorial and you're listening to me babble and babble on about Babel and Babylon. That's like a Babylon. Anyways, we are animating things here, ladies and gentlemen. We want this to snap out. I did an animation much like this in the phone tutorial, so a lot of you probably already skipped past this point. It's like, okay, Derek, we get the little flip out thing. So I want that to be snappy. I want it to pop out. Now there are some default easing things that you can use, which I do tend to use from time to time. A lot of times I'll do things manually by just pulling these curves, but let's just use some defaults here. So the way I brought up that menu, I'm just going to press A to select everything because I want all these values to do the same thing, is to press T with your mouse in this area and then change the easing to let's use, I don't know, cubic. And that's going to automatically kind of adjust these curves a new way. But I think this is the opposite of what we want. So if we press spacebar, they're going to whoop, snap into place. Oh, and we only had one selected. So let's just, well, we can just do the same thing here. A, T, cubic. Now they all should have it. Yes. So whoop. They start off slow and then they snap into place. I want it to be the opposite. I want them to be like, boom, here I am. And then they kind of settle down. So let's just select everything. And then T was to set that to cubic, but if you press Control E, you can set the keyframe easing type to ease out instead of ease in. And that gives me a nice, little bit more of like a slide effect. And now I did also mention I want to change the label orientation a little bit. So maybe this front one gets is dead on like that. But these ones, maybe we want to see that red a little bit. So we have it end with this one. So we've got a Z keyframe at the beginning there. That's fine. We can leave that. But we need to add a Z rotation keyframe at the end. So let's have this one. So that would be it turning inward. So I want it to go the other way. But I don't want it to spin that much. Maybe we should have set this part up first. Jeez. Okay, so I want that to end there. Let's just say -80. And then this one I want to end, what would that be? Positive 80, am I right? Am I right? I don't think I'm right. 80 is 10 off of 90. Whatever. I'm trying to do some crazy math here. Something like that looks good to me. So we kind of pop out, and then we've got this nice red framing there. So let's see. That one's spinning a ton, which I like. I like that one. The other guy needs to be a little bit more like that. So boom. So this one, let's see, so that one's spinning outwards, the one on the left, and the other one is spinning inwards. So that needs to start off a different direction, and we can actually select both of these. And let's find our transforms here. So we've got the Z rotation, Z rotation. So let's select everything. Well, again, because we have the normalize on, it's gonna look like they're exactly the same. Let's just do this manually. Let's go to have this one. I realize I'm slowing down a little bit here, y'all, but I don't want to skip anything. I want it to be clear. Okay, so we need to change this to rotate the other way and way more. So let's have it start. Okay, so I keep doing this. I mean, this is the type of thing that literally takes forever. Like I said, I've been working on this for weeks. Not weeks, but doing the actual animation, getting all the curves and everything, I did spend, I would say, I don't know, maybe a total of like 10 hours. Probably more than I should have. For a free tutorial, jeez. Like and subscribe. Okay, so this is really driving me crazy. Sometimes the best thing to do is just set a different value and see if it did what you want. That's the guess and check. And it literally did exactly what I want. But it needs to be more spinny. So it's going from -180 to -80. So then negative needs to go more negative. Turn that back to that. And then just, see, the guess and check. Way better. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit too much. Let's kind of turn that back. Just bring that back up to like a 240, something like that. I've been watching Sopranos lately, so if I start talking a little wild, don't blame me. Okay, so good thing we finished that and got it how we liked it before we did the camera, because when we dragged it back to 70, we had to make all these changes. Anyways, I like the way the bottles are popping out. That looks good. Boom, hello, a fine blend. What's good? Nice. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, we got the camera selected there. I want to be looking up a little bit sooner so that I don't, like, it's kind of lame where it doesn't really get into the nice. You want your shot to be cropped nicely the entire time. So, I don't love the zoom right there. There's a lot of empty space here. Oh wait, I think that's where I added the cubes. We gotta add the cubes. Yeah, so that was to take up a little empty space, even though I think they're probably even out of frame at the beginning. But I want the camera to look up sooner, and you're gonna have to go in and start playing with easing. So I already hid the Y location because I liked how that was. But let's play with this X rotation. Now this can kind of be hard, like I said, when they're on top of each other. If you just like click twice, it'll sort of switch between them. You can also lock things over here, which I'm beginning to learn to use things like that a little more. Maybe, you know what, let's go ahead and lock the Z location. Is that crazy? Nah, because we're gonna have to change it. I think we'll have to change it. If we're gonna, the X rotation and the Z location are sort of playing with each other here, so we're probably gonna have to change both of them. But anyways, I want the camera to be looking up more by then. And one way to do this little trick is to just put it where you want it, right there. Insert single keyframe, and then you can kind of see what your curve needs to look like. Maybe you don't want to, maybe you don't actually want a keyframe there, but just to see where it should be, you could delete that, and then you could go in here and do a little something like that. You want to use as few keyframes as possible, just so that things are nice and smooth. If you have too many keyframes, sometimes those keyframes can kind of create a little bit of jaggedness. So what I like to do is just put a keyframe there, see where that curve goes, and then mimic it with the handles manually. So now we're starting off, again, remember the acceleration here, we're starting off with a lot of movement. It's kind of looking up, and then it sort of goes back down a little bit. Now I do want this to stay flat so that it's not too snappy at the end. I want it to kind of, come to that nice ease. Now, if something's flat, that means it's not moving, basically. So the value is not changing over time. Again, time is the frames, up and down is the values. So we need to, so that this doesn't look so silly where it starts to look up, we need to match the Z keyframe to something similar. So I'm going to just select this. And this is one advantage of using the normalize, is that you can have them kind of right on top of each other, and you can just sort of match that. And that's probably going to be what we want to do here. So let's take a look at this now. Okay, popping up a little too much. Maybe the Y needs to change a little bit. Let's undo the Z. Maybe the X. Maybe we do want an extra keyframe. Let's flatten this handle again. And that's, by the way, Shift S, flatten handles. We'll flatten it back out. So maybe, okay, so this, another way to approach this is to find where it looks the worst. Adjust your values there. So this is a not, and I'm getting a little bit of a skewed version of it because I can see what's outside here. So maybe we should actually go back to our rendered view here and take a look. Oh, and we need to press play to restart that. Let it start updating again. Okay, so that is not good. So we do want to be looking up a little bit more there. So maybe we do need to just add in another keyframe, because I didn't like that popping off so much at first. So let's see what we got here. Here we go, pausing again. Or maybe let's just do it right here. I think there's a way you can turn on the, it's called like the passapartout. There we go. Look at that. Let's just turn that all the way up so we don't, I've never used that. Literally, this is the first time I'm ever doing that, turning it all the way up. It's brilliant. Okay, so what do we got now? Let's take a look at that. Nice. Okay, but maybe we need, the whole bottle isn't in frame. Not a crazy idea to adjust your focal length a little bit, if quick way to get things in frame. But I want to leave it what it was so that it matched our render. Our boss was like, remember when we took our boss the image and they were like, wow, that's so good. You're an amazing blunderer. What if it was the focal length that did it? We wouldn't want to change the focal length. So things are looking pretty good. Maybe zoom out a little bit faster. Let's unhide that Y location. And then maybe the Y doesn't start off so smooth. Maybe we kind of start off with a little oomph. Oh, that's going to throw off our X. This is why animation is just so exciting. So now, maybe we do need to add that back. And you can always just kind of move around different parts of your animation. Okay, so maybe I want a little more X there. So just kind of play with that curve, pull it to where you want it. Maybe like kind of rotate this a little bit. Maybe you want a little more of your Z. Maybe you select the Z. Maybe you pull that up a little bit. And maybe you scrub back through and see what you messed up. Oh, we didn't mess up too much. Looking nice. Just kind of scrub through your animation. Look at that. Bottle's nicely in frame. Fully in frame. Looking a little high right there. It's looking a little bit too much up. That's our X location. Let's probably flatten this handle. Oh, man, looking good. Okay, but that's going to throw something else off probably. So, boom. Okay, looking good. Pulling out. Nicely in frame. And then it settles out. Looking good. Do we like that? Maybe needs to be looking up a little bit more here. We can just move this, G, Y. By the way, Y is up and down. You may be tempted to do Z, but when you're in the graph editor, G, Y, it's going to pull that up. So right there. And that is another way, by the way, when you're in the graph editor, you can change values like that. And you don't need to right click insert keyframes. I mean, these are your keyframes. So once you're working in the graph editor, that's going to be your real fine tuning. So I think that this looks quite a bit better. It took some time with the graph editor, of course, but it does a lot to really play with these handles. And this is going to be the type of thing that I've said before. It's going to take a very long time. It will drive you crazy a little bit getting your shots right, but this is what separates the noobs from the pros, is a mastery of curves and in the graph editor and getting things to just have that nice pop to them. It really does a lot. And, a lot of people are asking me to review their work. Oftentimes, especially with animation, the number one thing I can notice is that there's just not enough time dedicated to getting those curves right. And now I don't want to make these videos horridly long. I know this is already very long, and especially with this first one, we covered a lot. But, I do want to emphasize that, even though I'm only spending so much time and saying, it looks pretty good, if I was, especially if this was a client project, there would be many more hours going into every little curve here to make sure things are just how you want them, as long as the client has a good budget, of course. The cheaper clients, you might get you might just get the default Bezier curves. But for the fine clients like our fine blends, you got to give them the best. So one other small thing I'm going to do, just so that this ends in a nice place. Let's go to our last frame. I want this to be rotated outwards just a little bit. And then RZ, just rotate that like that a little bit. And that's okay. Even though these are linked, their rotations are not linked to each other, so we can change them. Now, if you were to go into edit mode and rotate it, then that would throw it off. Let's go ahead and show you what that does, just because it's a long-ass tutorial. Pardon my language. Now it's all screwed up. Control-Z, Control-Z, tab out. Now we're back where we want. And similarly, you could have done the same thing with the labels, just like rotate them. But the long way that I did it is what we're going with. So shift, or what is it, control spacebar? Yeah, control spacebar in any viewport will make it full screen. So you can kind of go in here, take a look at that. Looking nice. I think I matched pretty closely the shot. Now, I don't think we did really anything with the lighting. I do want to emphasize the animation a little bit more than the lighting in this section, of course, because it is the animation section. But in the other animations, I think we will do a little bit of tweaking with the lighting to make sure things still look good. But this is basically the same setup as that still render, so we can leave it just like that. And it looks pretty fine. Feel free to make any small adjustments if you want. Maybe you're making huge adjustments and you are, see how fast you can completely change the look of this, just changing the color of the backdrop. Do stuff like that. If I see a white backdrop and you're red, I'm just kidding. White looks nice, let's be real. But yeah, mess with anything you want. Of course, if you're a beginner just following along, maybe it's a good idea to copy exactly what I'm doing. But of course, if you have an actual client project, I would encourage you to try something on your own. Or if you are comfortable with what we're doing, feel free to push the boundaries a little bit, do something cool. So the last thing I did, and fine, I'll just show you. I added some little cubes here. I'm going to go to edit mode, GZ, so that my cursor's on the bottom. Scale that down, something like that. And then I think I just put the cubes over here. Now, maybe in a separate video in the sections, I'll talk about the logic behind some of this. But let's do, I think, and you would want to typically add just a little bit of bevel. Little bit of bevel. That's a lot of bevel. Just so we get, get some highlights there. But, maybe do a little extra segments. Now, if something's very small in the frame, I won't always shade it smooth. I might just leave it flat so that my faces stay nice and flat. But you could shade it smooth if you wanted to. And then I want that to have the floor material, so I'm just going to shift-click the floor, Control-L, link materials, and that'll pick up that material. So yeah, maybe I'll do a separate video talking a little bit about composition and kind of why I did. Okay, what do we got here? We got negative 20. Let's do positive 20. So there's nice and even. Maybe I'll do a separate video talking about why I did all the shots the way I did, but yeah, the cubes, in this case, I thought the cubes just kind of made those sides a little less boring. I didn't want to just add like 9 bottles in bowling pin style. But, the cubes made it a little bit interesting, kind of helped to tell the story. And they lead your eye a little bit more towards the middle, similar to this point lamp in the back being kind of a natural vignette. These cubes, this dark area is kind of blocking out a little bit of light. It is sort of high contrast, but just, it's a little bit more shadow. I don't know. I could just be talking BS here, but I put a little bit of thought into it. And I liked the cubes there. You don't have to have the cubes. Of course, do something that matches your own label. But for the beautiful Kieran Black designed Fine Blend label, the cubes are here to stay. And you will see, obviously, that is a theme in the rest of the animation. So with all that being said, I think we're done with the first animation. Who knows how long that took. I'm about to Alt-Tab and stop the recording. But yeah, I like where we're at with that. So we'll leave it at that. To render this out, you'll... Should I do that as a separate video? I think I'll do that as a separate video at the end. But anyways, yeah, basically you would want to set your output folder and, render animation. Control F12. I don't think I've ever used that hotkey. For some reason, I always go up here and click render animation. But for render image, I use the hotkey. I have no idea why. Maybe I'll start using Control F12. Weird things, 13 years of Blender. And that's why. It's because I don't want to press 12 because I'm 13. I'm not 13. I actually just turned 30. I'm going to stop talking. Okay. I'll see you in the next section. Thanks for being here. Hope you've enjoyed the animation. I will punch myself if I miss something, but I think we've got a pretty nice shot there. We'll use that in our final animation. But before we put that whole final animation together, let us cover the other shots, which I will do in the next part. Thanks for being here. Like and subscribe. Teachable. I don't know where the big red button will be, but just, yeah, thanks.